Kai-sun stared at the holographic display floating above his desk. His four eyes blinked in different patterns, a sign of deep confusion among his people. The data made no sense. It had to be wrong. He was an ambassador for the Galactic Council, a position he had held for 30 years. In all that time, he had never seen anything quite like this. The humans had submitted a request to establish a new colony. That part was normal. Species expanded all the time. But the location they had chosen was absolutely not normal. Verdun 7. The name appeared in red letters on his screen. Red meant danger. Red meant death. Every civilized species in the galaxy knew to avoid planets marked in red. Kai-sun pulled up the environmental data. His skin turned a pale blue, another sign of distress. The gravity on Verdun 7 was twice what most species could handle. The atmosphere had toxic elements that would burn the lungs of almost any known life form. The weather patterns showed storms that could tear apart buildings. The native wildlife included creatures that made his homeworld's most dangerous predators look like gentle pets. There had to be a mistake. Perhaps the humans had entered the wrong coordinates. Perhaps their navigation systems had failed. Perhaps they simply did not understand the rating system. He sent a message to the human liaison office on the orbital station. Within minutes, his communication device chimed. A face appeared on his screen. It was Dr. Hana, the colony coordinator for the human government. She was smiling. This bothered Kai-sun immediately. People who made terrible mistakes should not smile. Ambassador Kai-sun, she said cheerfully. How can I help you today? Dr. Hana, he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. I am reviewing your colony application for Verdun 7. I believe there may be an error in your filing. Oh, no error, she said, still smiling. That's the right planet. Kai-sun felt his breathing tubes tighten. Doctor, I do not think you understand. Verdun 7 is classified as an extreme hazard world. The gravity alone would crush most species. The storms are violent enough to destroy standard structures. The native life forms are extremely aggressive. No intelligent species has ever successfully maintained a colony there. Dr. Hana nodded. Yes, we read all of that in the survey reports. It's actually one of the reasons we chose it. The colonists are very excited. Excited? The word came out as almost a whisper. Kai-sun could not process what he was hearing. Doctor, perhaps you do not fully comprehend the danger. Let me be very clear. This planet will kill you. Well, it will certainly try, Dr. Hana said with a small laugh. But we're pretty good at not dying. We've been practicing for a long time. Kai-sun spent the next 20 minutes explaining every danger the planet offered. He showed her mortality projections. He referenced failed colony attempts by other species. He even pulled up historical data about similar worlds where entire expeditions had vanished without a trace. Dr. Hana listened politely to everything. When he finished, she simply said, "We appreciate your concern, Ambassador. But the colony is already there. It's been operating for 6 months now." Kai-sun's chair made a creaking sound as he leaned back too hard. Already there? 6 months? But you only just filed the paperwork. Yes, that's true. We were supposed to file it before we went, but there was some confusion about the forms. We're still learning all the Galactic Council procedures. Human governments can be a bit slow with paperwork sometimes. You established an unauthorized colony on an extreme hazard world? Kai-sun could feel a headache forming in 3 of his 4 brain lobes. It wasn't unauthorized. We just filed the authorization a little late. But if you need to come inspect it, you're welcome to visit. Governor Subin would be happy to give you a tour. Kai-sun closed the communication and sat in silence for a long time. His species valued order, procedure, and most importantly, safety. The humans seemed to value none of these things. He could simply deny the application. Let them deal with the consequences of breaking protocol. But something bothered him about the whole situation. Dr. Hana had not seemed concerned. She had not seemed afraid. She had seemed happy. How could they be happy on a planet that should have killed them all months ago? He pulled up more data. The colony had 2,000 humans living there. There were agricultural domes, living quarters, research facilities, and even a school for children. The reports showed they were not just surviving. They were building infrastructure. They were planning to stay. This made no sense at all. Kai-sun made a decision. He would go to Verdun 7 himself. He would see this impossible colony with his own eyes. Then he would understand what was happening. Perhaps the humans were using some advanced technology that made the planet safer. Perhaps they had found some way to modify the environment. Perhaps the survey data was wrong. There had to be a logical explanation. He contacted Dr. Hana again and informed her that he would be making an inspection visit. She seemed delighted by the news. She said she would arrange everything and that he should prepare for a wonderful experience. Wonderful was not the word Kai-sun would have chosen. Terrifying seemed more appropriate. But he was an ambassador. He had a duty to understand the species under the Council's protection, even if those species made choices that seemed completely insane. He spent the next 3 days preparing for the trip. He requisitioned the strongest environmental suit available. He reviewed emergency protocols. He filed a testament with his family just in case. His colleagues thought he was being overly dramatic, but they had not seen the data on Verdun 7. On the morning of his departure, Kai-sun stood in the docking bay and looked at the small shuttle that would take him down to the planet's surface. It looked very fragile. Everything felt fragile when compared to the raw power of a Hellworld. He took a deep breath and boarded the shuttle. Whatever he found on Verdun 7, it would at least answer his questions. He would finally understand why humans chose to live in a place where they should not survive. The shuttle doors closed behind him with a soft hiss. There was no turning back now. The shuttle pilot was a young human named Teo. He had short dark hair and a smile that never seemed to leave his face. Kai-sun found this deeply disturbing. Nobody should smile this much when flying toward a planet that wanted to kill them. First time visiting Verdun 7, Ambassador? Teo asked as he checked the flight controls. Yes, Kai-sun replied. He was already wearing his environmental suit. It was heavy and uncomfortable, but it was rated to protect him from the worst conditions. He had triple-checked every seal. You're going to love it, Teo said. It's beautiful down there. A bit rough, but beautiful. Kai-sun did not respond. He was too busy reviewing the emergency procedures on his suit's internal display. The shuttle detached from the orbital station and began its descent. At first, everything seemed normal. The ride was smooth. The stars were visible through the viewport. Kai-sun allowed himself to relax slightly. Then they hit the atmosphere. The shuttle began to shake. Not just a little tremor, but a violent rattling that made Kai-sun certain every bolt was about to come loose. His harness dug into his shoulders as the craft bucked and twisted. He gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. Teo was humming. Actually humming a tune while the shuttle felt like it was being torn apart. Is this normal? Kai-sun managed to ask through clenched teeth. Oh yeah, totally normal, Teo replied cheerfully. The upper atmosphere is always a bit choppy. Just wait until we hit the wind shear layer. That's the fun part. Kai-sun did not want to know what the fun part was. He closed all 4 of his eyes and tried to remember the breathing exercises his meditation teacher had taught him. The turbulence got worse. Much worse. The shuttle dropped suddenly, and Kai-sun's stomach tried to climb out through his throat. Then it lurched sideways and he was absolutely certain they were going to crash. Alarms were beeping. Lights were flashing. Everything was wrong. Teo just adjusted a few controls and kept humming. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the shaking stopped. Kai-sun opened his eyes carefully. Through the viewport, he could see the surface of Verdun 7. It looked worse than the data had suggested. Dark clouds covered most of the visible area. Lightning flashed constantly, illuminating a landscape of jagged mountains and deep valleys. He could see what looked like lava flows in the distance, glowing red against the dark ground. The ocean, if it could be called that, was a sickly green color and appeared to be boiling. Beautiful, right? Teo said. Kai-sun had a very different word in mind, but he was too polite to say it. The shuttle descended toward a valley between 2 large mountains. As they got closer, Kai-sun could see the colony. It was bigger than he had expected. Dozens of buildings were connected by covered walkways. Large domes, which he assumed were the agricultural facilities, rose up from the ground. Everything looked solid and permanent. What caught his attention most was the location. The colony was built on a cliff edge. On one side were the mountains. On the other side was a sheer drop down to that boiling green ocean. Behind the colony he could see several active volcanoes, smoke rising from their peaks. They had built their home in the most dangerous spot possible. The shuttle landed on a platform near the center of the colony. As the engines powered down, Kai-sun felt the gravity hit him like a physical weight. Even sitting in his chair, he could feel the difference. His arms felt heavy. His head felt heavy. Everything felt heavy. Teo unbuckled his harness and stood up easily as if the gravity meant nothing to him. He stretched and yawned. "Governor Subin is waiting for you outside," he said. "Take your time getting up. I know the gravity can be a bit much for first-time visitors." A bit much. The gravity was crushing. Kai-sun struggled to stand. His legs shook with the effort. Each step toward the exit took concentration and strength. By the time he reached the door, he was already tired. The door opened, and Kai-sun got his first real look at the surface of Verdun 7. The air, even through his suit's filters, smelled harsh and chemical. The sky was a strange purple color. The ground was dark and rocky, with patches of something that might have been plants, though they looked more like twisted metal than vegetation. Governor Subin was waiting at the bottom of the ramp. She was a tall woman, with her hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore what looked like basic protective gear. Nothing like Kai-sun's heavy environmental suit, just a light jacket, gloves, and a breathing mask that covered her mouth and nose. She was not wearing any protection on her arms or legs. The toxic air was touching her skin. "Ambassador Kai-sun," she said warmly, her voice slightly muffled by the mask. "Welcome to Verdun 7. We're so pleased to have you visit our little colony." Little colony. She called this impossible settlement a little colony. Kai-sun carefully walked down the ramp, each step requiring effort. When he reached the bottom, he had to pause to catch his breath. "Are you all right, Ambassador?" Subin asked with what seemed like genuine concern. "The gravity," he managed to say. "It is quite strong." "Oh, of course. I forget sometimes that not everyone is used to it. We have a transport vehicle ready for the tour. That should help." A small vehicle approached. It looked sturdy and practical. Kai-sun climbed in gratefully, relieved to be sitting down again. Subin got in beside him and started the vehicle. As they drove through the colony, she began pointing out various features with obvious pride. "Those are our residential buildings," she said, gesturing to a cluster of solid structures. "Each one is built to withstand winds up to 300 kilometers per hour. We've had to rebuild a few after particularly bad storms, but they hold up pretty well." Had to rebuild. She said it so casually, as if buildings being destroyed by storms was just a minor inconvenience. "Over there are the agricultural domes," she continued. "We're growing both earth crops and experimenting with hybridization using native plants. Some very exciting work is happening there." Kai-sun looked at the domes. They were large and appeared to be made of some kind of reinforced transparent material. He could see green inside, which seemed impossible given the hostile environment. "How do you power all of this?" he asked. "Geothermal energy from the volcanoes," Subin replied, "plus solar panels during the brief clear periods, and we have some wind turbines that work during the storms. The planet may be trying to kill us, but it also provides a lot of energy." She laughed at her own joke. Kai-sun did not laugh. Nothing about this situation was funny. As they drove past another building, Kai-sun saw a group of children playing in a protected courtyard. Children. They had brought children to this nightmare world. The kids were running around chasing each other, laughing. They looked completely normal and completely unconcerned about the fact that they were living on a planet that should not support life. Kai-sun felt his confusion growing deeper with every passing moment. Governor Subin stopped the vehicle outside one of the larger domes. The transparent walls showed rows of green plants inside, growing in neat, organized lines. A sign near the entrance read, "Agricultural Research Center." "I want you to meet some of our colonists," Subin said as she helped Kai-sun out of the vehicle. "I think it will help you understand what we're doing here." They entered through an airlock. Inside, the air was cleaner and slightly less oppressive, though Kai-sun still felt the crushing gravity with every movement. The dome was warm and humid. Plants of all kinds filled the space. Some looked like normal earth crops. Others looked strange and alien, with unusual colors and shapes. A man approached them, wiping dirt from his hands onto his pants. He was middle-aged with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. He wore simple work clothes that were stained with soil. "Ambassador, this is Dong-hyun," Subin said. "He manages our agricultural operations." "Pleased to meet you," Dong-hyun said with a warm smile. "Would you like to see what we're growing?" Kai-sun nodded, still trying to process everything. Dong-hyun led them through the rows of plants, talking enthusiastically about his work. "These are standard earth tomatoes," he explained, pointing to one set of plants. "They grow well enough with some modifications to the soil. But these, he moved to another row. These are hybrids. We've been crossbreeding earth crops with native verdant 7 plants. The hybrid plants look strange. Their leaves were a darker color, almost purple. The vegetables growing on them had unusual shapes. Why would you crossbreed with native plants? Kai-sun asked. Are they not toxic? Oh, incredibly toxic, Dong-hyun said cheerfully. But they're also incredibly hardy. They can survive in the natural soil here, which is full of heavy metals and other nasty stuff. By combining them with earth crops, we get plants that are nutritious for us and can grow in the local environment. It took a lot of trial and error, but we're making progress. He said this as if creating entirely new species of plants was just a normal day's work. Is it not dangerous to experiment with toxic plants? Kai-sun asked carefully. Dong-hyun shrugged. Sure, it can be. We lost a few test subjects early on. But that's how you learn, right? Now we know which combinations work and which ones will kill you. We keep careful records. They moved on from the agricultural dome to another building. This one was clearly a research facility. Equipment that Kai-sun did not recognize filled the rooms. Scientists and technicians moved between workstations, studying samples and recording data. A young woman looked up from her work as they entered. She had short hair and wore protective goggles pushed up on her forehead. Her excitement was visible even from across the room. Governor Subin, she called out, walking over quickly. Perfect timing. I was just about to send you my latest findings. Ambassador Kai-sun, this is Ji-won. Our chief geologist, Subin said. Ji-won shook Kai-sun's hand with enthusiasm that nearly knocked him over in the heavy gravity. She immediately launched into an explanation of her work. We've been studying the volcanic system, she said, pulling up displays on a nearby screen. There are 5 major volcanoes within 50 kilometers of the colony. All of them are active. The magma chambers are massive and the geological activity is constant. She sounded happy about this. Kai-sun could not understand why anyone would be happy about living near 5 active volcanoes. The best part, Ji-won continued, is that we can tap into the geothermal energy. The heat flow is incredible. We're generating more power than we currently need. Plus, the mineral deposits near the volcanic vents are fascinating. Rare elements we've never seen before. What about eruptions? Kai-sun asked. Surely the risk of volcanic activity is a concern. Ji-won waved her hand dismissively. Oh, we get minor eruptions all the time. Maybe once or twice a month. When that happens, we just retreat to the reinforced shelters for a few days until things calm down. It's not a big deal. We've designed the whole colony with that in mind. Not a big deal, Kai-sun repeated weakly. The real excitement was 3 months ago when we had a major eruption, Ji-won said, her eyes lighting up. The lava flow came within a kilometer of the colony. I was able to get samples while it was still molten. The data we collected was absolutely incredible. She pulled up images on the screen. They showed rivers of glowing lava, clouds of ash, and explosions of molten rock. In one image, Kai-sun could see a figure in protective gear standing very close to the lava, holding some kind of collection tool. He realized with horror that the figure was probably Ji-won herself. Subin guided him out of the research facility and toward another section of the colony. They passed through several covered walkways. Through the transparent sections, Kai-sun could see the harsh landscape outside, the purple sky, the twisted plants, the rocky ground. Everything looked hostile. They reached a building marked Security Operations. Inside, a woman was checking equipment. She wore what looked like combat gear, though it was lighter than military armor. Various weapons hung on racks along the walls. This is Yuna, head of colony security, Subin said. Yuna looked up and nodded in greeting. She had several visible scars on her arms and one across her cheek. Her eyes were sharp and alert. Security? Kai-sun asked. What exactly do you need security for? The local wildlife, Yuna replied. They're not too fond of us being here. Can't say I blame them, but we need to protect the colonists. How dangerous is the wildlife? Yuna considered the question. Well, last week we had a pack of 6-legged predators try to break into the agricultural dome. They're about the size of earth bears, but faster and meaner. We managed to drive them off without any casualties on our side. She pulled up her sleeve to show a long scar. Got this one during that fight. The creatures have claws like knives, but we learned from the experience. Now we know their attack patterns better. She spoke about fighting bear-sized monsters as if it was just part of the job. Kai-sun noticed she seemed almost proud of her scars. Do you not find this life difficult? Kai-sun asked. The danger, the harsh conditions, the constant threats? Yuna smiled. Difficult? Sure, but that's why I volunteered to come here. Back on Earth or the easier colonies, life was too safe, too comfortable. There was no challenge. Here, every day matters. Every day you have to be sharp, have to be ready. It makes you feel alive. As they left the security building, Kaisun felt overwhelmed. Every person he had met seemed genuinely happy to be here. They were not just surviving. They were thriving. They found joy in the challenges that should have broken them. These were not desperate refugees with no other choice. These were not prisoners being punished. These were volunteers who had chosen this life. People who had looked at a planet that could kill them in 1,000 different ways and decided it was exactly where they wanted to be. Kaisun could not comprehend it. Everything in his culture, in his species' entire history, told him that intelligent beings sought safety and comfort. They avoided danger. They built shields against threats. They made life as easy and pleasant as possible. Humans seemed to be the opposite. They ran toward danger. They embraced hardship. They found comfort in discomfort. What kind of species did that? That evening, Governor Subin showed Kaisun to his guest quarters. The room was simple but comfortable, with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the colony. He removed his environmental suit, grateful to be in a controlled environment where he could breathe without assistance. He tried to rest, but sleep would not come. His mind kept returning to the colonists he had met. Dong-hyun working happily with toxic plants, Ji-won collecting samples from active lava flows, Yuna bearing scars like medals, and all of them smiling, content, fulfilled. Around midnight, an alarm began to sound. It was not loud or panicked, just a steady warning tone. Kaisun sat up in bed, his heart's racing. A voice came over the communication system. Attention all colonists. Weather alert level 3. Superstorm approaching from the west. Estimated arrival in 30 minutes. All personnel should secure loose items and prepare for turbulence. This is not a drill. Kaisun rushed to his window. He could see colonists moving outside, but they were not running in panic. They moved with purpose and efficiency, securing equipment and closing protective shutters. It looked like a well-practiced routine. Someone knocked on his door. It was Governor Subin. "Ambassador, I thought you might want to see this," she said. "We have an observation deck that's protected by reinforced windows. The view is quite impressive." Impressive was not the word Kaisun would have chosen. Terrifying seemed more accurate. But he followed her through the corridors to a large room at the top of the main building. The observation deck had windows on all sides, giving a full view of the surrounding landscape. Already the sky had changed. What had been a purple twilight was now a churning mass of black clouds. Lightning flashed constantly, illuminating the darkness with brief, violent bursts of light. Several colonists were already in the observation deck, watching the approaching storm with interest. Some had cups of tea or coffee. A few were taking notes on electronic tablets. One person was actually eating a sandwich. They were treating this like entertainment. The storm hit like a physical force. Wind slammed into the building with a sound like an explosion. The windows, thick and strong as they were, seemed to flex inward slightly. Rain did not fall so much as it was thrown horizontally across the landscape. Each drop hit with enough force to be visible. Kaisun gripped the railing in front of the window, his knuckles white with fear. The building shook. The lights flickered briefly before backup systems kicked in. Outside, he could see debris being picked up by the wind and hurled through the air. Governor Subin stood next to him, completely calm. She held a cup of tea in one hand. "The buildings are rated for winds up to 500 kilometers per hour," she said conversationally. "This storm looks like it will peak at around 400. "We should be fine, should be?" Kaisun managed to ask through his fear. "Well, there's always some uncertainty in weather prediction," she replied. "But we've been through dozens of these storms. The buildings have held up well." Lightning struck close enough that Kaisun could feel the electrical charge in the air. The thunder was immediate and deafening. He flinched involuntarily. The colonists around him barely reacted. "Why do you do this?" Kaisun asked suddenly, his voice rising over the sound of the storm. "Why choose to live like this? Why bring children to a place like this? Why not find a safer world?" Subin turned to look at him. Her expression was thoughtful. She took a sip of her tea before answering. "Do you know much about Earth's history, Ambassador?" she asked. "Some," he replied. "I know it is your homeworld, that you evolved there. Earth is not a gentle planet, Subin said. It has deserts where the temperature can kill you in hours. It has Arctic regions where you will freeze to death if you are not prepared. It has jungles full of diseases and predators. It has volcanic regions, earthquake zones, hurricane paths, and humans lived in all of these places, not just survived but thrived. Another massive gust of wind shook the building. Kaisen tightened his grip on the railing. Subin did not even pause her speech. We are descended from people who crossed oceans on wooden boats, she continued, who climbed the highest mountains just to see what was at the top, who explored frozen wastelands and burning deserts, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because something in human nature drives us to test ourselves against impossible challenges. She gestured toward the storm outside. When we joined the Galactic Council and saw all the paradise worlds other species had settled, we realized something. Those worlds were too easy, too comfortable. Humans need struggle. We need hardship. Without it, we become soft and complacent. Kaisen stared at her. You need hardship? That makes no sense. Why would any intelligent species seek out suffering? It's not suffering, Subin said firmly. It's living. Every morning when I wake up on Verdun 7, I know that day matters. I know that my choices and actions have real consequences. There's no safety net, no easy path. We have to work together, think creatively, adapt constantly. That's not suffering. That's being truly alive. She pointed to a group of children in the recreation area visible below them. They were playing some kind of game, running around without any apparent concern for the storm raging outside. Those children will grow up strong, Subin said. They will know how to face danger, how to solve problems, how to adapt to impossible situations. They will be better humans than they would have been on some comfortable paradise world where everything was easy. The storm reached its peak. The wind was a constant roar. Rain hammered against the windows with a sound like drumming. Lightning turned the darkness into a strobe of white and black. The entire building swayed slightly, its structural supports flexing to absorb the force. Kaisen watched in amazement as the colony held firm. The building stood. The windows did not break. The power stayed on. Everything the humans had built was designed for exactly this kind of punishment. They had not just adapted to Verdun 7, they had conquered it. Around him, the colonists continued their conversations. Someone laughed at a joke. The person with the sandwich finished eating and got another cup of coffee. They were not just enduring the storm, they were ignoring it. For the first time since arriving on Verdun 7, Kaisen began to understand. This was not madness. This was not a death wish. This was humanity being exactly what they were meant to be. They were a species that had evolved by facing challenges, by adapting to harsh conditions, by refusing to give up no matter how difficult things became. Other species in the galaxy looked for the easiest path, the safest home, the most comfortable life. Humans looked for something else. They looked for meaning, and they found it in the struggle, in the challenge, in the triumph of survival against impossible odds. The storm began to subside after about 2 hours. The wind decreased. The rain lessened. The lightning became less frequent. The colonists began to disperse, heading back to their quarters as if nothing unusual had happened. Governor Subin finished her tea and set the empty cup down. I hope that answered your question. Ambassador, she said with a gentle smile. We choose to live on Hellworlds because we are human, and for humans, paradise is boring. Kaisen looked out at the battered but unbroken colony. He understood now. He finally understood. Kaisen spent one more day at the colony before returning to the orbital station. He used that time to observe the colonists going about their daily routines. He watched them work, eat, laugh, and live. Every observation confirmed what he had learned during the storm. These people were not just surviving, they were happy. The shuttle ride back up through the atmosphere was just as rough as the descent, but this time Kaisen did not grip the armrests quite as tightly. He was beginning to understand that what seemed like chaos to him was just normal life for humans. Back in his office on the orbital station, Kaisen sat at his desk and stared at the blank report form on his screen. He had to make a recommendation to the Galactic Council about the human colony request. His job was to determine whether the settlement was viable and whether it should be officially approved. By every standard measure used for other species, the colony should be rejected. The environment was too dangerous. The risks were too high. The location violated multiple safety protocols. Any other species attempting what the humans were doing would face certain disaster. But humans were not like any other species. Kai-sun began to type. His report would be the longest and most detailed he had ever written. The council needed to understand what he had learned. They needed to know that humans operated under completely different rules. He started with the facts. The colony on Verdun 7 had 2,000 inhabitants. They had been there for 6 months. During that time, they had established agricultural operations, research facilities, residential areas, and all the infrastructure of a permanent settlement. They had survived multiple severe storms, volcanic activity, and encounters with dangerous wildlife. Not only had they survived, but they were thriving. Then he moved to the more difficult part of the report. He had to explain why humans were different. He had to make the council understand something that went against all conventional wisdom about intelligent life. He wrote about human evolution, how they had developed on a planet with extreme environmental variations, how their ancestors had been persistence hunters who chased prey across vast distances in burning heat, how they had spread to every corner of their homeworld, adapting to deserts, frozen tundra, volcanic islands, and hurricane-prone coastlines. He explained that humans did not seek out danger because they were foolish or suicidal. They sought it out because challenge was fundamental to their psychology. Without it, they became unhappy and unfulfilled. They needed to struggle in order to feel truly alive. He described the colonists he had met. Donghyun working with toxic plants and creating new hybrid species. Ji-won studying active volcanoes and collecting data that could benefit all of galactic science. Yuna protecting the colony and treating danger as just another part of her job. Governor Subin leading her people with calm confidence through circumstances that would break most other leaders. These were not broken people or desperate refugees. These were skilled professionals who had volunteered for this assignment. They could have chosen easier postings. They could have lived comfortable lives on paradise worlds, but they chose Verdun 7 specifically because it was difficult. Kai-sun paused in his writing and looked out the window of his office. Below he could see Verdun 7 spinning slowly in space. From orbit it looked deceptively peaceful. The storms and volcanoes were not visible from this distance. It looked like just another planet, but he knew better now. He knew what life was like down there, and he knew that the humans on that planet were doing something remarkable. They were proving that life could exist in places where it should not. They were expanding the definition of what was possible. He returned to his report and began writing his recommendations. First, he recommended that the colony be officially approved. Despite the unconventional circumstances and the late filing of paperwork, the settlement was clearly viable. The humans had demonstrated that they could not only survive on Verdun 7, but build a thriving community there. Second, he recommended that the Galactic Council revise its environmental safety standards specifically for human colonies. The current standards were designed for species that needed protection from danger. Humans needed something different. They needed challenges. Applying normal safety standards to human settlements would actually harm them by removing the very elements that made them successful. Third, and most importantly, he recommended a complete change in how the Council viewed extreme environment worlds. For thousands of years, such planets had been classified as uninhabitable and avoided by all civilized species. They were considered worthless because no one could live there safely. But humans changed that equation. What was worthless to every other species was valuable to them. The Hellworlds that everyone else abandoned were exactly what humans wanted. Kai-sun wrote that the Council should establish a new category of planets specifically designated for human colonization. These would be the worlds that were too dangerous for anyone else. The worlds with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, violent weather, and aggressive wildlife. The worlds that every other species had rejected as impossible to settle. He suggested that these worlds be marked clearly and that other species be discouraged from attempting to settle them. Not to protect the humans, but to protect everyone else. If humans were allowed to claim the galaxy's hellworlds, they would transform them into productive colonies. Any other species trying to compete for those same worlds would face impossible conditions and certain defeat. It was, he realized as he wrote it, a strange kind of recommendation. He was essentially suggesting that humans be given exclusive rights to the worst real estate in the galaxy. But he knew it was the right approach. Let humans have the hellworlds. Let them test themselves against impossible challenges. Let them find meaning in struggle. And in doing so, they would solve one of the galaxy's long-standing problems. There were thousands of planets that were theoretically habitable, but practically impossible to settle. They had resources that could be useful, but the cost and danger of extracting them was too high for any species to consider worthwhile. Humans would change that. They would go to those impossible worlds and make them work. They would extract resources, conduct research, and expand knowledge in environments where no one else could operate. They would push the boundaries of what was possible, just as they had always done throughout their history. Kai-sun finished his report and read through it one final time. It was thorough, detailed, and honest. He had included everything he had observed and learned. He had made his recommendations clear and justified them with evidence. But before submitting it, he added one more section. A personal note to the council members who would read his report. He wrote that his time on Verdun 7 had changed his understanding of what intelligent life could be. He had always believed that the goal of civilization was to make life easier, safer, and more comfortable. Every species he had ever encountered shared that belief. Humans were different. They had achieved safety and comfort on their homeworld and in their easier colonies. They had the technology and resources to live in paradise. But they chose not to. They chose challenge instead. They chose to test themselves against the universe's hardest problems. And in doing so, they had taught him something valuable. Perhaps the purpose of intelligence was not just to make life easy. Perhaps it was also to see how far you could push the boundaries of what was possible, to take the impossible and make it work through determination, creativity, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Humans did not survive Hellworlds despite the dangers. They thrived on them because of the dangers. The challenges that would break other species made humans stronger. The environments that would kill other colonists made human settlements flourish. Kai-sun concluded his personal note with a simple observation. The galaxy had room for many different kinds of species. There were those who sought paradise and those who sought knowledge, those who valued art and those who valued order. And now there were those who sought the impossible and made it possible. Humanity had found its place in the galactic community. They would be the ones who went where no one else could go. They would be the ones who did what no one else could do. They would be the ones who looked at a hellworld and called it home. He submitted the report and leaned back in his chair. Somewhere far below, on the surface of Verdun 7, 2,000 humans were going about their day. They were farming impossible soil, studying violent geology, protecting against dangerous wildlife, and raising children in the galaxy's harshest environment. And they were happy. Kai-sun smiled to himself. He had arrived at Verdun 7 expecting to find madness. Instead, he had found something far more interesting. He had found humanity,